Welcome to Part 2. Here we'll be looking more closely at the tombs of St Mary's. It is important to note that for the majority of the people commemorated in St Mary's, no biographical material is known. From about 1850, the churchyard was closed as insanitary, and burials took place in the Wendon Road Cemetery. The website of the Friends, by the way, has a database of the people buried there and a couple of hundred biographies as well. The memorials for this video in St Mary's are selected for the interesting people that we do know something about. A church monument can take various forms, ranging from a simple commemorative plaque or mural tablet affixed to a wall to a large and elaborate structure on the ground or also embedded in the wall. It is usually placed immediately above or close to the actual burial vault or grave, although very occasionally the tomb is constructed within it. Aside from the two effigies on the outside of the church, there are no surviving medieval memorials inside St Mary's. These would have been removed piecemeal over the centuries as the church was refurbished and space was needed. We talked in Part 1 about the simple cross slabs salvaged from the Hospital of St John. Over time, the fashion was for these slabs to get more elaborate and might even include a recumbent figure. Most surviving examples of figures today are of decent quality, which is why they survive, but these rather childish examples perhaps suggest the less good ones may have been common as well, and this may explain why they don't survive. However, around the 13th century, smaller two-dimensional effigies incised in plates of brass and affixed to monumental slabs of stone became popular too. These memorial brasses were somewhat cheaper and particularly popular with the emerging middling sort. Again, sadly, no medieval examples survive in Bridgwater. However, one of the oldest surviving memorials in St Mary's is a brass, and this dates to 1620. It commemorates John Stradling, a merchant who was several times mayor. The Latin translates roughly, and this translation is by Jarman, the historian, "Here lies Stradling, sprung from a noble race. He was thrice mayor of this borough, and in his youth as merchant he went to Spanish shores, that he might seek abundant and hard-earned wealth. From this time in port, resting in everlasting peace, he rejoices, and is himself made companion with the angelic choir. After darkness I hope for light. John Stradling, his only begotten son, and heir to his piety, has therefore placed this in 1620. So John Stradling Sr., recorded here, was mayor of Bridgwater in 1604, 1611 and 1618. And in the parish registers, Mr. John Stradling was buried on the 2nd of February, 1620-1621. The Stradlings claimed to descend from the Stradling baronets of St Donat's Castle in Glamorgan, and were settled in Chedsey from the late 17th century, if not earlier. Incidentally, and by sheer coincidence, St Donat's Castle is now home to a medieval wooden screen from Bridgwater, most likely from St Mary's, which was moved there in the early 20th century by William Randolph Hearst, the American newspaper baron. The removal of almost all the many wall paintings in English churches in the iconoclasm of the English Reformation and the English Commonwealth left plenty of bare spaces on church walls. Over the following centuries, these were gradually filled up by monuments to the wealthy. It was the lack of competition from religious painting and a tolerance in England of figurative sculpture in memorialization, which most Protestant countries did not share, that produced the exceptionally rich English holdings of large sculptural church monuments. In the 16th century, church monuments became increasingly influenced by Renaissance forms and detailing. Plasters, reefs, strapwork skulls, coffered arches, obelisks, allegorical figures and so on, particularly in France, the Netherlands and eventually England. There were major innovations in effigial posture, the deceased often being shown reclining or kneeling in prayer and surrounded by the whole family as in life. An example of this is the King's Mill monument on the north wall of the chancel of St Mary's. It has a pediment and cornice supported by two columns with two cherubs. In the foreground lies a warrior in armour reclining on his right elbow. In the back part, within two recesses, are the effigies of two men kneeling, long robes and spurs. The truncheon is now missing, so the warrior's left hand holds nothing. Since this is resting just below his hip, the truncheon was probably removed by a prudish Victorian, as it may have looked somewhat suggestive, which would have been the original point. There is a Latin inscription to Sir Francis Kingsmill, Militis, or Knight, of Ballybeg, County Cork, Ireland, died 20th of July 1620. Also his sons, Henry Kingsmill, dated 22 April 1621, and Francis Kingsmill the Younger, died 16th of August 1640. This marble and watchet alabaster monument either dates to 1620-1621, when Francis or Henry Kingsmill died, although it may have been commissioned by Francis's third son William of Ballybeg Abbey, an MP for Mallow, in the 1640s. The fashions here look more 1640s than 1620s. Kingsmill himself bears something of a resemblance to Charles I, who was in a bit of hot water at this time. Captain Sir Francis Kingsmill was baptised 6th of January 1507 in Kingsclere, Hampshire. A Protestant, he was distinguished for his service in the brutal Irish campaign of Queen Elizabeth, serving under Sir George Carey in 1601-1602 during the savage 9 Years' War against Spain and the Irish. Through his soldiering, Kingsmill acquired lands at Ballybeg Abbey, County Cork, and was knighted at Dublin in March 1603. That he was buried in St Mary's Church would suggest he resettled in Bridgwater after Ireland. His wife was Dorothy St Leger. As well as his 3 sons, he had 2 daughters, Anne and Dorothea. The latter's daughter Elizabeth was the wife of the celebrated Samuel Pepys, no less. The Kingsmill Memorial is the finest structure in St Mary's Church, and its genteel refinement perhaps glosses over the sea of blood Kingsmill waded through in Ireland, but at least testifies to his son's great love for him, and this is something to ponder the next time you're in. The 3 Kingsmills will be buried nearby in the chancel of the church, which before the Reformation had been the most holy part of the church, and this prestige at least carried on after the Reformation. The most common type of memorial in St Mary's Church is the ledger stone. These are inscribed stone slabs usually laid into the floor of a church to commemorate or mark the place of the burial or an important deceased person. Those vaults we saw earlier will often have been capped by one of these stones over its entranceway. However, almost all of them have been subsequently moved. They may be decorated with relief sculpture or incised coats of arms, or other appropriate decorative items such as skulls, hourglasses, and so on. Any surviving ledger stones in St Mary's Church were reassembled by the Victorians at the west end of the nave, some now illegible. Others were used as paths out in the churchyard and have since disappeared. A particularly striking one to the Anderon family may be seen on the wall by the south door. It was once in the chancel, but later moved and propped upright here. This recalls Ferdinand Anderon, Gent, died 1707, aged 75. Also his son Ferdinand, Mayor of Bridgwater, died 1727, and his wife Mary, died 1746, aged 80, along with various of their children and relatives. This memorial was erected by John Anderon, who died in 1744. Later, members of the family moved to Bristol, Bath and London, and there are 3 other memorials to some of their relatives elsewhere in the church. Another memorial to the Anderon survives in Wemden Churchyard, which remembers the son and wife of Ferdinand I, who both died in 1675. There are some impressive skulls on that stone, and a poem, "Short was her life, long was her pain, great is our loss, much more her gain." The 17th into 18th century saw an increase in classicism and classical styles and the use of marble. Tucked away awkwardly behind the organ is the memorial to John Harvey, who was born in Bridgwater Castle in 1696 and died in 1771. The castle and the attached manor, and roughly a third of the town, were bought in 1630 by Henry Harvey, an attorney. He appears to have converted the old internal gatehouse, dividing the castle in 2, into a grand mansion, and his descendants occupied it until the 18th century, when they sold the rest of the castle property to the Duke of Chandos in 1721. A memorial to John Harvey's wife Sarah is elsewhere in the church. A bed which was once in the mansion survives in America in the Agecroft Hall Museum, Richmond, Virginia. Christie's sold it in 1972, having belonged to a member of the Chubb family, a descendant of John Chubb, 1745 to 1818, the Bridgwater artist. It came to him by way of John Chubb's daughter Lucy, born in 1794, who brought the bread with her when she moved to London in 1830 to live with her nephew Morley. The richness of the carving is testament to what the great castle might have looked like after its refurbishment in 1630. In a slightly less grand state of survival, the Blake Museum possesses a carved wooden lion said to have come from the castle, which would fit neatly the style of Harvey's time. Following on from such classicism, in the early 19th century brought Greek revival monuments, such as this memorial to Dr. John Dunning, a founder of Bridgwater Hospital. This is on the south wall of the chancel. He was a Justice of the Peace and Deputy Lieutenant for the county. He died 11th December 1821, aged 79, so was born in 1742. The memorial also commemorates his wife, Susanna, daughter of Philip Baker of Bridgwater. She died 17th of May 1824, aged 87. Also remembered here is John Haviland, who was a surgeon and colleague of Dr. Dunning at the hospital. A son of his became a professor of surgery at Cambridge, and later descendants practised as doctors in Bridgwater. Here we have Robert Anst, who was a ship owner and merchant, civil engineer, and Bridgwater's first county surveyor. He was baptised 9th of December 1757 and died 30th of April 1845 at Madley, Shropshire, aged 88. Anst was the son of William and Mary Anst. In about 1788, Robert eloped to Gretna Green in Scotland with Susanna Ball, a Bridgwater Quaker girl. Susanna's younger sister, Hannah, married a William Reynolds, a Shropshire ironmaster, and after William's death in 1803, one of the 8 children of Robert and Susanna, also William, took over the running of the Madley Wood or Bedlam Ironworks near Coalbrookdale from his uncle. Robert Anst followed his father as a shipowner and merchant, and later took over his brother-in-law's share in the Coalport China Works. He lived at first in a house near the town bridge, facing the river, now the Catholic chapel, and latterly moved to Dampier House. Robert Anst, too, was Comptroller of Customs by 1794, Town Councillor from 1799 to 1834, and Mayor in 1804, 1817 and 1825. He was Alderman from 1827. He was a member of the Commission for Sewers, which is a horrible name for the body responsible for the drainage question of the Somerset levels. He was an active anti-slavery reformer and was a Freemason. He was a keen amateur geologist and ornithologist and wrote 2 books on mathematics. He was elected a Fellow of the Geological Society in 1818. His correspondence on ornithology with Colonel George Montague was published in 2003. His professional work in the county covered roads and bridges, seawall works at Huntsville and Blue Anchor, and much drainage works including the King Sedgemoor Drain at Dumble, and he was involved in the design of the proposed waterworks for the town, located at St Matthew's Field, that pumped water from the Durley Brook to a reservoir nearby. Anst purchased a hoard of Roman artefacts discovered at Eddington in 1801, and also acquired a number of Roman coin moulds discovered near Chiltern Polden, which he displayed in his museum at Bridgwater. On his death, his collection was sold by Sotheby's in 1846, but according to Jarman, his fossils were sold to the Bridgwater Literary and Scientific Institution. Some of his antiquarian collection was acquired by the British Museum, and his astronomical clock, which was made by John Cole of Neverstowe, may be seen in the Museum of Somerset. All in all, Anst was quite a remarkable polymath. As we move into the Victorian age, we see something of a simplification in memorial styles, and much use of brass or stone plaques. This elaborate inlaid brass memorial commemorates the Reverend Thomas George James, vicar from 1849 to 1857, and he was responsible for the Victorian restoration and the ending of burial within and outside of the church. He was born in 1812, the 3rd son of Frederick William James of Manchester. He entered Brasenose College, Oxford in 1831, graduating in 1835 and getting an MA in 1838. From 1836 until 1848, he was incumbent of Habergham in Burnley, Lancashire, and he was then appointed Vicar of St Mary's in Bridgwater. He preached his first sermon at St Mary's on the 3rd of December 1848. He was responsible for major alterations and restoration, which took place at St Mary's between the years 1849 and 1856. During this time, the galleries and box pews were removed and later replaced by benches. Much of the south wall was rebuilt, the nave and chancel roofs replaced, the clerestory completely rebuilt and heightened, and new windows put in. The squint, a medieval relic which would have allowed people to stand at the door of the church and peer all the way to the high altar, was removed altogether, with the wall dividing the north transept and the present arches inserted in its place. However, very elaborate and expensive plans to completely rebuild the medieval tower and spire were, perhaps fortunately, abandoned. It was also during this period that the churchyard was closed for burials and the Wenham Road Cemetery purchased and opened. The small vestry, replaced by the current one in 1902, was also built at this time. In 1851, Thomas James was appointed a prebendary of Wells Cathedral. He appeared to have been a man of strong character who was very determined to have his own way. He was in conflict with various sections of the congregation over several matters, but he also gathered to himself a party of loyal parishioners who supported him in his plans for the improvement of the church. In 1857, Prebendary James exchanged livings with Michael Ferriby Sadler and became incumbent vicar of St George's Chapel, Hanover Square, London. He remained there until his death on the 27th of February 1864, when he was 51 years old. A plaque to his memory, testament to those who supported him in Bridgwater, and also to one of his own children, was erected in the chancel of St Mary's Church. His might be seen as the first cenotaph memorial plaque placed inside St Mary's Church. These are memorials to the memory of someone not necessarily buried there. Almost all the memorials in the church from then on, including the stained glass we talked about last time, fit this pattern. These are places of memory, but not of burial. The most touching and important of these cenotaph-style memorials, now inside St Mary's, would not be to one person or even to one family, though. This part of the church had been the chapel of St George in the medieval period. George is famous to us now for the legend of him slaying the dragon. The historical figure behind the legend was a Roman soldier, apparently of Greek extraction, born in Syria-Palestine. He was martyred on the 23rd of April, 303. George became especially popular in England as a result of the Crusades, having appeared alongside the Crusaders with St Demetrius and St Maurice at the Battle of Antioch in 1098. Many English knights who fought with King Richard the Lionheart in the Third Crusade between 1198 and 1192, and having taken up the ideology of crusade, became devotees of St George and brought this back to England. As such, George was patron of soldiers and chivalry, but also the kings of England, which meant praying at this altar could be to the soul of a particular soldier, but also for the health and prosperity of England as a whole. At the Reformation, this chapel was suppressed with all the others, and this space of the church came to be co-opted by the powerful Seeley family. They built a loft gallery to observe church services above it, and the floor of the chapel was used as their private mausoleum. The stained glass around this space is still dedicated to their memory, and they're still buried below the floors. However, after the Great War of 1914 to 1918, the First World War, this part of the church was set aside to remember the fallen of that conflict. With so many young men of Bridgwater killed and buried in foreign lands, and many of their bodies never being found or identified, this gave the grieving families of the town somewhere to pay their respects. The carved wooden altarpiece has 3 panels. The central panel is the carving of the crucifixion with praying angels, which is a symbol of sacrifice. The left panel is St George slaying the dragon, a symbol of good overcoming evil, but also patron saint of England. And on the right is the figure of St Louis of France, with the banner of St Denis, a symbol of Britain's major ally during the war. The roll of honour of those killed is on 14 panels, where there are about 320 names inscribed on the east and south panelling for the 1914-1918 war. There are also 70 names on a separate board in the southeast corner for the 1939-1945 war, with one each for the Korean War and the Falklands War. So here we come more or less full circle, with this part of the church again dedicated to St George, not crusading this time, but to the memory of the fallen of the town. And this collective memory also harkens back to the charnel house we talked about in part 1. There's no bones here, but all the same, this is a space within the church to remember the collective dead. So that's a brief overview of the crypts and tombs of St Mary's Church, or at least the bone house and tombs of St Mary's Church. There are a lot more stories that can be told though, and you can learn more about these on the website, but dwell a little next time you're in St Mary's on all the history around you and underneath your feet. A comprehensive illustrated account of all the internal memorials inside the church may be seen by those who want to see it on the Bridgwater Heritage Group website. Hearty thanks to Richard Philpott, who took many of the memorial pictures used in this video. Cheerio!